This is a short introduction to Node.js and mean. Node.js is a server-side language in JavaScript, and mean is a full-stack solution that includes Node.js. That's one of the more common full-stack solutions for Node.js. So what is mean? It consists of MongoDB for a database. Express is the E, and we'll cover in this class, lightly cover Express, MongoDB. A is actually client-side technology, which is AngularJS. We're not going to cover here, but it's a way of doing advanced kind of client-side JavaScript interactions and styling and templates. And then N is the Node.js. So you can see a couple pictures on here, but basically, again, the AngularJS is what you'll see on the client, like in the browser, what would be delivered. And Express will communicate to and from the client, and that will directly speak with Node or be on top of Node, so to speak. And then there's interactions directly with MongoDB. So what is Node.js? It was created in 2019. It was invented in essence off of something called the Google's V8 JavaScript engine, which was part of Chrome. And the goal was to try to create server-side Java so that you could have a solution like in mean, where it's composed of the same language both on the client side and on the server side. And one of the big advantages of Node over some other server-side languages is that it's what's called event I/O, and we'll look at that a little bit later. So basically, you use Node.js. It's one of a number of server-side solutions. But the goal is to try to build scalable systems. And one of the main talking points as to why Node.js is popular and why it can be scalable is that it's event-based. So normally servers will run as thread-based, and we'll actually have to block the thread based on waiting for various occurrences to happen. In the case of Node.js, it's not the case. It serves each in an event loop that can handle simultaneous result requests. So what you see down here is the idea: you have a request coming into this loop continuously. It's basically whenever it needs to do some kind of operation in the background, it has callback functions that then, when are done, it will call back. When the operation is complete, it'll trigger that callback. So you can do a lot with Node, like you can do with any kind of server-side programming language. Again, it can be considered potentially nicer to have both the client-side and server-side language being the same, meaning based off of JavaScript. Obviously, Node itself is not client-side, it's on the server side. So you're not going to be writing applications for outside of using web interactions. There's no DOM built in, any of those things that you see with client-side JavaScript. So it doesn't really have a GUI. It can deliver results that can then be interpreted on the browser or used in mobile applications, or other applications might be invoking web services that are written in Node. So to talk again about thread versus event-driven, to give you a little idea between the difference, is that we have an asynchronous event-driven case for Node. There's only one thread which repeatedly fetches events, and it uses a queue and processes the requests that come in. And so you don't have to do any kind of blocking. So that's a really big difference and is one of the reasons why Node is considered to run relatively fast. Because again, we don't have to wait with this kind of asynchronous non-blocking situation. So this is a little diagram here that shows you the difference between having to wait versus not having to wait. So blocking, typically with other systems doing any kind of file reading, data access, certain kinds of long calculations could require, blocking if you were contacting other services, for example, that was doing calculations. So in the case of Node.js, we're non-blocking. We basically go and make a request to retrieve data, and when the data is completed, then it'll call a callback. Okay, so here's an example of this. We're saying we want to read the file called test.txt, and the function that's specified here, function with parameters error and data, that just simply prints the data out to the console in a log command, is a callback function and will be called when the data is retrieved and passed back. So we talked about speed. This is just a little comparison between a few different things with regards to Apache. So Apache itself is a web server, and it is made to handle just requests. So we're really looking at number of requests per second. So what you can see is even compared to static requests from Apache, which are the quickest kind of requests, it's the number of requests that can be processed is 2,966 versus 5,569 for Node.js. So there's a number of companies that use Node.js, and when I say a company uses Node.js, it doesn't mean that it uses it only. It can use other server-side languages, and often, most frequently they do, for different tasks. Okay, but here are some players: LinkedIn, PayPal, Groupon, Yahoo, Uber, Walmart, and so a number of them. Over time, Ruby on Rails has become less popular, and in some ways the replacement for Ruby on Rails is the mean stack, or there's some variations, but the key there is they're using Node.js. So Node.js supports doing HTTP requests and response calls, which is the basis of what we call REST methodology on the web, and there's a number of them, but the ones that maybe are most familiar with you are get and post. There's also put and delete. So Node, where is it used? Really any server-side application can use Node. Chat, messaging, real-time applications, intelligent proxies, communication hubs, all kinds of server-side applications can be used. Here's a few more: ad servers, doing recommendation systems, on and on. So one of the things that when we create a Node project, and we have a bunch of detailed steps on how to do that on our website, so we're going to only go over kind of the basics here in this PowerPoint lecture, and you're going to read the details more fitting on a detailed web pages. Is a special file called package.json. So when you create a Node or a mean application, it will create a package.json file. And basically what it contains is just the general information about the project. So that includes name, version, you can see some different dependencies, license, and what the main file is, and so on. So one of the things that Mean and Node.js is known for is that there's many modules. That's similar in Java if you're used to packages, or if you're used to languages like C++, like libraries. And modules, as you can see, there's over 1 million. That's actually, I think that's a typo, but I think it's 121,000. Sorry about that. Modules, and that's quite a lot. So we have a package manager in JavaScript to help us with installing these modules, and that is called the NPM tool. So when you install Node, one of the things that you'll get is access to this NPM tool, and you can use it to install various modules. Now on the website it shows you how to actually install Node.js, and we're not going to go over that again in this lecture. Those details are left for there. So since there are so many different modules, and you will be using them in your applications, except for the silliest, simplest ones, you need to not only install them, but you need to know how to require them and how to utilize them in your code. So inside your Java code, anytime you want to use a module, you say require and then the name of the module. So here's some various examples. HTTP deals exactly with what it says. FS is file system, and Express is the E in our mean stack that we'll talk about a little bit later. So let's start with a hello world example and talk about how you would set that up. So the first step is to create a directory and call npm and install using these instructions. So you make your directory, okay, and then you change into directory. Of course, if you depending on what kind of operating system you're using, equivalent commands. And then when you're ready, you say npm init. And one of the things it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and create the package.json file for you. You're going to, in that same directory, want to create an index.js file. And what we're creating right now is just a simple node file. We're not really doing a mean stack, okay? Later on, we'll talk about how to start that, and the web page certainly contains a little more details. So opening up whatever editor you like to use, you're going to type in the following code. This is about the most basic code that you have to create a web service in Node. And what you'll see is it uses HTTP, and if we look before, we would be requiring the use of HTTP here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a server. And if you were to look at the API, what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to register a function that is going to respond to any requests that are coming in. So you notice that this function has both a request and a response associated with it. These are the HTTP requests, like get, post, so on, that are coming in, and then responses are what you want this code to return as your HTTP response. So what we're going to do here is we're going to automatically set up our response as status 200, that everything is okay. You might recall that like 404 means file not found, etc. And we're going to be returning plain text. And rather than returning some HTML or delivering an HTML file, which we'll show you how to do that later, that might have inside embedded AngularJS or other CSS files, we're going to just simply send the response as a body, as some plain text saying hello world. So we just say response, and then we end it with the final message here, hello world. And we're going to set up all of this. You notice that this here is the end of the create server where I'm moving my mouse and function, and then we say listen 8081. So basically what this is doing is creating a server that listens at port 8081 and responds by every time it gets a request, it just responds by saying hello world. And then this is a little message saying, hey, this is the location 127.0.0.1, which is the same thing as typing in localhost at port 8081. That's the way you would go to your web browser, Chrome, whatever it is you like to use, and type that in. If you had run this code locally, let's say, you would be able to view it. So this is an example of the package.json file that got created when I set up when I did, as shown here, the npm init. Okay. We're ready to go ahead and run our application. So we just say node, whatever the name of the file is, index.js, app.js, whatever it is you called it. And you're going to notice that it will tell you the information about listening on whatever port, and we can type in 3000, and there's our hello world message. So E, we don't generally write just raw Node.js code for handling requests and responses. We typically use a more full stack solution, and one of the simplest full stack solutions, but also very popular, is called the mean stack. And that's Mongo Express, AngularJS for the client side, and of course HTML and CSS, but then also Node.js on the back end. And as I mentioned to you before, what Express is actually handling the requests. Let's go back a little bit, all the way to the beginning when we introduced what mean was. Here we go, a little farther back than I thought. Here we go. Is that Express is going to handle any kind of the actual requests coming in. So even though we just wrote and we ignored Express and we went directly to Node, that in the case of a mean stack is not typically what you're going to do. You're going to make requests directly through Express. That is a layer on top of Node.js. So Express is what we call a web framework, a Node.js web framework. So it sits on top of Node.js. It is what's called a minimal web application framework. There are some other frameworks that have been proposed. One I'll mention towards the end of this talk is called Meteor. There's also others like Sails and so on. That there's one full stack solution for using Node.js, but certainly this is one of the more popular ones. Meteor is possibly supplanting it, but is not a topic of this class. So anyways, here you can see the interaction is that from the client side, which could be running HTML, CSS, and possibly AngularJS, but it could be through HTML forms. We're getting requests, and they come in through our web framework that's called Express. And then it is making calls down, possibly to other Node.js applications. It could be just using Node calls within itself in the file to do various manipulations. So why this extra layer? The whole idea is ease and increased in functionality. So Express can do a number of different things, like routing. We'll look at static files, something called middleware, form processing, simple forms authentication, cookies, session manipulation. A lot of this you can do in Node.js, but you would be writing possibly more code to do it. So that's the whole idea of a framework. In part, one of its goals is to make to package code to make it easier so you're not rewriting code, but also it can do so in a certain kind of using certain kinds of patterns. Express is a pretty minimalist web framework, so we don't see a lot of software patterns inside implemented, but in general that's what a framework can do for you. So there are a lot of different alternatives than Express, which is the E in mean. Sail is one. Meteor is really a replacement for all of mean, but it sits on top of Node.js. So installing Express is pretty simple, and again, I refer you, we have a web page that kind of takes you step by step, but simply you're typing in npm install Express, and the -- save, what that does is it'll actually save that dependency in your project settings so that it knows that now this is no longer just a simple Node program. This is now a Node and Express program, okay? So, and this is really installing a module is what we're doing. Express is a module. What it's going to do when you do this installation, in fact, any installation, is it's going to populate with some files. Here you can see there's an Express subfolder that's part of the folder called node_modules. So this directory, node_modules, if it doesn't already exist because you've installed a previous module, will actually get created the first time you install a module, okay? And then depending on what you've installed, you can see here I have support for cookies. Cookies is a different module. You can see Express, and there's some other things that we're not going to go over right now. The alternative to do the install in the way that I showed you just now is what's called the generator. And if you do an npm install express generator, it's showing this line right here with the name of the app. Here we're calling it Hello App. You're saying I'm basically going to generate an Express-based Node.js app called Hello App. It's going to set up a bunch of special directories for you, which is really great, which is more than what you're seeing here. Okay, here's just the Node.js module. What this is going to do is it's going to create, again, your initial package.json, but it's going to also set up a bunch of subdirectories like public, routes, views, and bin. Views are for doing just that, your presentation layer. There are different languages like, HTML with AngularJS. There's something called embedded JavaScript, which is basically HTML with just pure JavaScript and style embedded inside of it. And so there's different options for views, but that's what would go in the views directory. And routes are different. Node.js Express Node.js files that can be invoked based on different URLs or URIs. Okay, so these are basically different server-side script files. So you can see here it's creating one called index, one called users, and so on. So once you've run this code, it's gone ahead and created the Hello app. You're going to go ahead and change into that directory that it just created, and you're going to call npm install, which will install all the dependencies that were listed out from this generation. When you're ready to run, there's different ways you can run. Here's one method. We'll show you others a little bit later. So we want to create the actual code because what happened before was just the creation of dummy files. There really weren't any code in there. So this is a breakdown of a hello world and done in Express. So the first thing you're going to notice is that whenever we use a module, at the top of the file we're going to say require the module. And so here we're doing that with Express, assigning it to the variable called Express. Here we're calling the initialization, or if you want to think of it as like a constructor function called Express, and we have an object here called app. Now if you go to Express, the main Express website, and there's a link off of our website, there's an API there, and you can read all about this app object. And it has a number of different methods. For example, some of the methods it has to do with doing HTTP requests. So you see get, for example, you see post, for example. These are methods that you can invoke. So let's look at the get here, the get method on our app object. And what it's actually saying is whenever a get request comes into our app, and in this case, it ends with just slash, right? You could have any path you wish. You're going to invoke the function that's specified here, which is just simply, again, to take our response object, res, and to send the message hello world. Now notice we don't have to do all this stuff with setting up context type and all of that you saw in the previous example with Node.js. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so all this 200 content type, all of that, those are defaults. We don't need to do that. So you can see there's less code here involved. And then we need to say that this application is listening at what port. We want it to actually be responsive, and without doing that, it won't be. So we're going to say we're going to listen at 3000. And anytime a request comes in, whether it's a get, a post, a put, whatever method type it is, we're going to just simply print out to the console log this string here, that the app is listening on port 3000. So the next thing I'd like you to do is go over to the website, see how to use Express in more detail. There's a lot of examples. I'm going to ask you possibly in class to work on one of them. Also shows you how to use MongoDB. And interestingly, I think we have on the website using the Heroku Cloud, which has a free tier for using mean, for example, Node.js. But that may change from term to term, so we might be using Amazon Web Services or whatever. But take a look at the website. For future, kind of the step after that is if you really love Node.js, you want to take the next level, I'd really recommend doing more work with mean, but then moving on to learn more about Meteor. This is not my picture, obviously. And it certainly is very biased because a lot of people do use mean, is that Meteor is like a race car. Okay, there's less callbacks. It's more of a subscription model than mean. So once you learn its complexity, its potential could be to be more productive.